Nashville, Tennessee's state capital, well known for country music, hot chicken, and of course, the best game of college football I've witnessed in a long time. But one thing that many people often neglect to consider is Nashville's meteorological history. Having fallen victim to multiple significant tornado events over the past 246 years. Standing out among them, an F3 tornado, which was part of the March 14th, 1933 tornado outbreak, an F3 during the outbreak of April 15th through the 16th in 1998, and an EF3 that 5 years ago shook the city, which was part of a much larger outbreak that caught the nation off guard. On the eve of March 2nd, 2020, forecasters projected a threat of large hail and a few brief twisters. What happened instead was an event that significantly overperformed. A long-track supercell wrought havoc across Middle Tennessee during the overnight hours, producing 10 tornadoes, including an EF3 that tore through Nashville and an EF4 just outside of Cookeville, becoming the worst tornado outbreak in the state since the 2008 Super Tuesday outbreak and the 2011 Super Outbreak. So, how did this happen? Well, that's why I'm here. Today, we will explore the 2020 Nashville tornado outbreak, deep diving into the synopsis of the event, the environment that set the stage, the timeline of the twisters, the aftermath and response, the controversies that came after the fact, and how the affected areas are doing today. Welcome to Nature's Fury. The events of March 2nd, 2020 were not well forecasted. Sure, generally speaking, the threat of severe weather was present, but the probability of a tornadic supercell that could produce multiple significant to violent tornadoes was insanely low. That's best represented in the Day 1 SPC outlook, which had Central Tennessee within a 2% tor risk at most. First, let's look at the mid to upper level of the atmosphere. At the 500 millibar level, two things pop out immediately. In the southwestern United States, a cutoff low pressure system was present. This system starts out as a trough, becomes pinched off from the jet stream, and eventually separates entirely. Meanwhile, there is a large trough located in Canada and the northern US. The combination of the trough and the cutoff low contributed to westerly to west-southwesterly flow across much of the eastern United States. At the surface, a long-stretching cold front ranging from northern Ontario down to northern Texas progressed eastward. A surface low was expected to develop in southeastern Oklahoma and move into the lower Ohio River Valley later that night. The initial expectations for the event were as follows. During the late afternoon and evening hours of the 2nd, a few storms were expected to fire off of the slow-moving front in Arkansas, with ML Cape around 1500 joules per kilogram, bulk shear near 40 knots, and elongated, straight-line mid to upper-level hodographs, which favored splitting supercells. The primary threat was large hail, driven by mid-level lapse rates in excess of 8 degrees Celsius per kilometer, and cool mid-level temperatures. As low-level shear increased, there was a possibility of 1 or 2 tornadic storms to develop within the environment before growing upscale into an MCS. Now let's go over the numbers. At the 500 millibar level, there was 40 to 60 knots of westerly to west-southwesterly flow across the state of Tennessee. At the 850 millibar level, the low-level jet kicked in overnight, bringing in 40 to 55 knots of westerly to southwesterly flow to the region. Bulk shear across Tennessee ranged from 40 to 50 knots, and effective storm relative helicity was absurd, ranging from 200 to 500 meters squared per second squared, mainly localized to where the primary supercell of the night would end up being. The main issue was surface cape. It was around 1000 joules per kilogram in western Tennessee and Arkansas at around 20 Z. But after 0 Z, surface cape was low, ranging from 250 to 500 joules per kilogram, with a small area of 1000 joules per kilogram of surface cape in western Tennessee with a surface cap in place. Mid-level lapse rates range from around 7 to 7.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer. The surface instability was an issue for potential tornado development, but I will get into that later, as other elements were at play that helped overcome this. Both temperatures and dew points were within the mid to upper 50s throughout the night. The Storm Prediction Center began noting the potential for severe weather beginning on February 29th, with a marginal risk for portions of the Mid-South. The Day 2 risk was mostly the same, a marginal risk with a 2% tour, 5% wind, and 5% hail contour. At 12:02 a.m. Central on March 2nd, a slight risk was outlined from northeastern Arkansas eastward into western Tennessee for a 15% hail risk. At 10:25, the risk was updated and expanded eastward, now containing a 5% tour and 15% wind contour, while also adding a hatched area for the hail risk. As for the tornado risk, Nashville was in the 2%, and Cookeville wasn't in 1 at all. Although, there was something interesting to note about the 20Z outlook. It stated, considered upgrade to enhanced risk, but given expected initiation near sunset, when the boundary layer will be stabilizing, the window of opportunity for a more significant severe event appears relatively small. Regardless of the forecast, Mother Nature had other plans. Throughout the daytime, people were going on with their lives as usual. The early morning sounding was unassuming. While storm relative helicity was passable, there was no instability. By the afternoon, forecasters at NWS Nashville got more concerned about a tornado threat, showing a graphic at 5:36 p.m. that included the possibility for nocturnal tornadoes. Around 0Z, soundings in Little Rock showed the presence of high lapse rates, associated with an elevated mix layer from the 800 to 600 millibar level that originated from New Mexico the day prior. HRRR analysis showed that the EML expanded to Nashville by the time the cell would arrive near the city. The EML would help increase mid-level lapse rates, in combination with warming and moistening of the boundary layer, which resulted in a marked increase in CAPE during 0 to 6Z. At 9 p.m., a surface warm front had developed with showers and storms located along it in southeast Missouri and western Tennessee. Overtop this area was a region of frontogenesis at the 850 millibar level, just northeast of the warm front, with high vertical wind shear and CAPE exceeding 1250 joules per kilogram. The supercell developed within the area of showers and thunderstorms by 9:30, in a region where frontogenetical mesoscale ascent overlaps with instability and large vertical wind shear, which favors the rapid development of a supercell. The supercell itself stayed close to the center of a 700 millibar vorticity maximum, where instability and vertical wind shear was maximized, which traveled alongside the supercell. In that environment, it organized quickly, and produced its first tornado at 10:12 p.m., an EF1 in Gibson County with winds of 95 miles per hour, which was on the ground for 11 minutes. 20 minutes later, an EF2 twister that was on the ground for 16 minutes in Carroll County, both of which went unwarned. Why? Well, it goes into a major issue heading into the night from a warning perspective, especially for this event. With these early tornadoes in particular, you were dealing with low-res radar imagery due to radar dead zone issues. However, there was a much more pressing issue that would last throughout the night as the supercell moved onward. With nocturnal tornadoes, the National Weather Service and the Weather Enterprise as a whole relies heavily on local reports from spotters and government officials to help fill in the gaps when radar imagery isn't clear enough. While a webpage on the twisters from NWS Memphis doesn't exist to my knowledge, based on the rural locations where these two twisters occurred, one can infer that there were little to no reports made to the NWS. Storm spotters were pretty much non-existent too. Many didn't see a point in chasing a nocturnal 2 to 5% risk in rugged terrain in the Tennessee Valley, in an environment with a low floor and an extremely high yet improbable ceiling. So for most of the event, the NWS had to rely on radar. At 11:07, a third twister touched down, an EF2 that moved through Benton and Humphreys counties that killed one. At 11:22, a tornado watch was issued for portions of Middle Tennessee. 20 minutes later, a brief EF0 tornado touched down in eastern Humphreys County. And then, just a little half past midnight, the first major tornado of the night touched down in Davidson County. At 12:32 a.m., a twister formed on the western fringes of Davidson County, west of River Road Pike as it moved eastward across Bell's Bend. Initially, damage was localized to blown down trees, but that swiftly changed as it honed in on Nashville. It quickly widened and intensified as it moved over the Cumberland River and struck John C. Toone Airport, causing strong EF2 damage while being around 0.65 miles wide. Residents of the city were now all aware of its presence, and a tornado warning was issued for downtown Nashville at 12:35. 4 minutes later, it was replaced with a PDS warning. Upon hearing the warning, many headed to shelter. If the EAS alert didn't wake them up, it was the whirling winds outside or the colorful flashing lights illuminating the night sky. Those bright flashes would be one of the only few ways that people would know that the tornado was right over them. Then, the tornado sirens started wailing across northern parts of downtown. The twister produced EF0 to EF2 damage as it struck the Tennessee State Prison, blowing down numerous high-tension transmission towers. Then, farm facilities at Tennessee State University is across the Cumberland River again. And then, numerous homes between I-40 and Buchanan Street. News stations were on the air. WTVF radar made it clear as day. A debris ball and reflectivity. A sign of an extremely dangerous tornado that was producing damage on the ground. Meanwhile, Jason Nash was working as a crane operator when he saw the twister illuminated by power flashes. There was a problem, though. He was stuck in the crane 375 feet in the air. Panic set in as he filmed the twister. "If something happens, make sure everyone knows I love them, Carla. There's a real tornado right there." The tornado was thankfully far enough away to not cause any damage to the crane Jason was in. The twister moved into East Nashville, intensifying further to EF3 strength as it hit businesses and buildings in the Five Points area, and damaging homes in Laughlin Springs and Barclay Drive. Michael Dauphini had just gotten off of work, and was leaving the Attaboy Lounge with his girlfriend, Aubrey Sexton. Unbeknownst to them, the twister's swirling debris landed on top of them, killing them both. The twister crossed over the Cumberland River one more time, weakening as it moved northeast through the Donaldson Hills and Lincoln Hills neighborhoods, before strengthening to a strong EF3 once more, leveling homes in the Stanford Estates area before going back to producing EF2 damage to homes and businesses. Then it turned southeast, passing through Hermitage and into Wilson County at around 12:54. The twister's path now followed along I-40 for the time being, slowly turning to the north as it moved across the Chandler Road and Triple Crown Parkway neighborhoods of Mount Juliet, before strengthening once again to a powerful EF3, reducing homes down to some small interior rooms in the Catalpa Drive and Clearview Drive neighborhoods area, before striking the West Wilson Middle School and Stoner Creek Elementary School. An elderly couple who was in the Catalpa Drive neighborhood was killed. As it approached Golden Bear Parkway and Eastgate Boulevard, the twister reached its peak width of 0.9 miles, and its estimated peak intensity of 165 miles per hour, leveling several warehouses and killing a security guard at the Seva warehouse on Athletes Way North. The twister started to weaken, but continued to produce damage to several homes and structures before reaching the southern portions of Lebanon, Tennessee, where most of the damage ranged from EF0 to EF1, with some spots of EF2 damage between Sparta Pike and Peyton Road. Then, crossing near Tucker's Crossroads, where it produced its last area of EF2 damage. The twister turned southeast and crossed into Smith County at 119, where it produced EF0 to EF1 damage to structures in Grant, New Middleton, and areas south of Gordonsville. At 1:35 a.m., the twister roped out and lifted east of Highway 141 and north of Judkins Lane after being on the ground for 60.13 miles over the course of 63 minutes, killing 5 and injuring 220. Many in Nashville and the suburbs were shocked at what just occurred, and focus quickly shifted to the aftermath. However, the night was far from over. The cell produced a brief EF0 tornado on the Smith-Putnam County line just 3 minutes after the Nashville EF3 lifted. But 6 minutes after the EF0 lifted, the state would witness the strongest and deadliest tornado of the outbreak. At 1:48 a.m., a tornado formed northwest of Baxter along Highway 70, initially producing minimal damage to homes and outbuildings, and blowing down trees as it continued eastward across Gainesboro Highway at 1:49 a.m. However, a minute later, the twister quickly intensified to EF2 strength in the Prosperity Point subdivision, north of Highway 70, before strengthening further to EF3 strength as it crossed Bloomington Road and Clemens Road in the Double Springs community at around 1:51. However, on radar, the overall presentation of the storm looked unassuming at first. The velocity couplet itself was still there, but it looked small and weak. Yet, it's important to know that the radar imagery would end up being very misleading on the twister's true intensity. Just to bring it up as a refresher, the way radar works is that it sends a beam of energy, radio waves, out into the atmosphere. If the wave strikes objects in the atmosphere, typically precipitation of some kind, the energy is then returned to the radar and provides the distance to that object. The data that is received measures wind speed, rainfall rates, etc. Best case scenario, there isn't some massive object in the way that could hide very key observations. Cookeville is roughly 60 miles away from the Nashville radar site, and the radar beam itself is looking about 4,500 feet in the air, so it's not as close to the radar site as before. Not to mention, the office was also keeping an eye on other storms, and the fact the Cookeville tornado developed so rapidly wasn't helping either. All of those factors likely had an impact on the initial tornado warning for the twister being issued at 1:48, right as it touched down, meaning residents had barely any lead time unless they were glued to radar. To be fair, it was severe warned, and the storm had a history of producing tornadoes. And while yes, the guidance on what to do are very similar for both, but it's extremely important to realize that there were only a few frames to work with before the tornado eventually lifted. Creating a scenario where properly warning a storm like Cookeville became extremely difficult. Then there was the other issue. News stations were cutting back and forth between covering the aftermath of the Nashville tornado and covering the Cookeville tornado. This was especially problematic given that the Cookeville twister would end up being on the ground for only 8 minutes. Even without that hindsight, all effort needed to be put on covering the twister. However, that didn't happen. Those in Cookeville get their news from Nashville stations, resulting in residents who were watching their local news stations being unprepared, as there were moments where the tornado warning wasn't even on screen for more than a minute. While there is a level of personal responsibility when it comes to responding to a twister, there were people who were genuinely unaware due to the back and forth coverage. All of this, from the radar issues to the news coverage, led to people having little to no warning from their usual methods of receiving weather alerts ahead of the twister. Around 1:52, the worst of the storm came. While moving across Charleston Square, Punk Whitson Road, and North McBloom Chapel Road, the tornado rapidly gained strength and became a 175-mile-per-hour EF4 twister, leveling homes and killing multiple people. All within the span of just a few minutes, people's lives and belongings were gone in an instant. The tornado started to lose steam as it crossed over Highway 70, damaging more homes and buildings, weakening down to EF2 intensity, then EF1 as it was along Crescent Drive, before rapidly dissipating as it entered the downtown area of Cookeville. By the end of the 8-minute terror, it had killed 19, injured 96, and caused roughly $100 million in damages. After the Cookeville tornado lifted, the worst of the night had passed. The long-track supercell produced a brief EF0 to the southeast of Cookeville, before producing an EF2 twister that moved through Cumberland County, and an EF0 immediately after in Morgan County. The supercell was no longer discrete, and it became part of a general line of showers and thunderstorms. For the areas after the supercell hit, the other major threat was flash flooding, as lines of training thunderstorms produced multiple inches of rainfall across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, just to name a few states impacted. There was also 4 additional tornadoes in those 2 other states I just mentioned, but all the focus was on what happened in Tennessee, and quickly, people started to assess the aftermath. As the tornadoes moved away from the areas impacted, news stations quickly honed in on what happened in Nashville. Across the state, search and rescue operations started. While the destruction was obscured by darkness, people knew that it was bad, as parts of the bustling Nashville skyline went dark. Come the next morning after the rain had moved through, people's worst fears had come to light. Damage from the Nashville twister began with uprooted trees and the destruction of some outbuildings. The devastation escalated near John C. Toone Airport. Warehouse buildings that were meant to unload and unload materials for semis were flattened, with vehicles nearby that laid underneath the debris. The airport itself, destroyed. Hangars ripped apart with small aircraft heavily damaged and covered with sheet metal. Other airplanes tossed onto the runway. A large radio tower and multiple transmission towers were downed, left as mangled, twisted metal. Off of Ed Temple Boulevard, roofs were uplifted and the trunks of hardwood trees were snapped. One building was split in half with the west part of it knocked off of its foundation. Houses near Cumberland Gardens were hit. While the degree of the destruction varied from house to house, numerous roofs were visibly damaged. One home lost its entire roof and northern exterior wall. All of the trees in the neighborhood were blown down. Homes in Buena Vista were shifted off of their foundations. The O'Reilly Auto Parts on Rosa L. Parks Boulevard had its roof torn apart, with insulation hanging down from the ceiling and doors. In Germantown, apartment buildings had their upper stories ripped apart, and wooden power poles were broken and laid on top of the roads, alongside the power lines. In East Nashville, multiple buildings were severely damaged, the hardest of which ended up being a Family Dollar, a tattoo shop, and a small building that housed businesses, all of which were annihilated. The nearby local YMCA and the East End United Methodist Church were not spared either from the tornado's wrath. Damage to roofs and properties were still consistent as it began exiting Nashville. The intensity of the carnage increased once more near Stanford Estates. The local school had sections of the building destroyed, and a portable classroom laid on top of the roof. Multiple homes in Donaldson were left with only a few small interior rooms. Homes in the elementary school in Hermitage were missing multiple parts of their roofs as well. A small fourplex roof on one of the apartment buildings near Old Hickory Boulevard was completely blown off. Areas in Mount Juliet were hit the worst. Multiple homes along Fescue Drive, Catalpa Drive, and Fairview Drive were unrecognizable. The warehouses off of Athletes Way were flattened. Other metal buildings on Eastgate Boulevard were similarly damaged. Houses and stores in Lebanon also suffered extensive losses. But the worst of the outbreak was further east near Cookeville. Putnam County Mayor Randy Porter called the aftermath the worst time of his life. He had served as the Emergency Services Director for 30 years in the county. He was no stranger to emergency situations. But according to him, you really don't think they'll ever happen in your community. He remarked to WSM V4 News that the morning following the twister as the sun rose over the destroyed homes, there was this eerie quiet. Not a sound. There wasn't a bird chirping. There was not crickets. No, nothing. Total, dead silence. Damage off of the mountains was minimal, but that rapidly changed as you got closer to the dense neighborhoods north of Nashville Highway. Poorly built homes were slabbed clean, such as this brick home on the southwest corner of Charlton Square. The EF4 damage started on the southeastern corner of the street. 2 homes swept clean from their foundations with little debris left over. A house on Plunk Whitson Road was only left with a scarce amount of interior walls, with a few cabinets remaining intact on what remained of the foundation. The first house on Hensley Drive suffered similarly, the kitchen still visible. Cabinets, the microwave, and a marble countertop that miraculously stayed in place. While to the south, a brick home swept clean with the trees mutilated behind the residence. A house next door suffered the same fate. A family's Nissan wedged up against the foundation. The next house obliterated. All that's left was a pile of debris. The next house, at least they still had their floor. A husband and wife couple survived the twister in that home. They manually installed the floors as well. 2 houses down from there was barely a sign a house even stood, with 3 vehicles on top of what was left. The next house was swept clean, with all the anchor bolts screwed in. Another house nearby was in a similar situation. The home gone, with the anchor bolts still screwed in. The family of 4 who took shelter there survived with non-life-threatening injuries. Trees on Mockingbird Hill Circle were visibly debarked, and homes were slabbed along there too. The last area of EF4 damage was located off Echo Valley Drive, with 6 residences being destroyed and swept clean. Homes off Herald Court were destroyed while the twister had estimated winds of 165 miles per hour. And north of one residence laid the roof and top story from a house a block away. The last instance of EF3 damage was north of West Broad Street and east of Country Farm Road. A small house that was destroyed by the twister. The rest of the damage became more minimal with time, from removed roofs and down metal poles to just the removal of some roofing material. The destruction wrought was only part of the story. There were the stories of those who survived and perished trying. In Nashville, Michelle Whitten and her 3 children took shelter in the closet. Then the walls began to shake. The house was shaking, the window shattered. I've never been so scared in my life. She was able to get to safety thanks to a friend who called her and informed Whitten that they may be in the path of the twister. Robin Forgets and her husband ran to their basement. Shortly after arriving, their home was momentarily lifted off of its foundation. Kayla Sherritt and her brother emerged from shelter to find their parents trapped in another bedroom, with the ceiling on top of them, plywood right in between them, and a tree right at their mom's face. Others, such as Justina Reek, was in disbelief. I think everyone in East Nashville is feeling that. It's very sad to see people who work hard at their craft lose everything. In Cookeville, many stories were harrowing. Eric and Faith Johnson, alongside their 3-year-old daughter and 18-month-old son, took cover in their bathtub, feeling their home lifting and the house shifting before the house itself exploded. Faith held on to her children as tightly as she could. Eric was thrown 50 yards away from his home and had to have multiple staples put in his head. Faith had 2 broken ribs, while the children only had scratches and bruises. Laura Neal's daughter, who had hearing problems, managed to survive after being ripped from her bedroom and landing in the next-door neighbor's pool, covered in debris. But many were not as fortunate. Brandy Barker was killed in Lebanon by the Nashville EF3 while working security at a Siva warehouse. She left behind her 2 children and a fiancé. Her obituary stated that she spent her life building a future for her children and giving them the best life possible. In Cookeville, the Kimberlin family, Josh, Aaron, and their 2-year-old son Sawyer, perished in the twister. Josh and Aaron remembered for volunteering and babysitting for their friends, and being gentle people all around. Amanda Ann Cole of Sparta was killed, a member of the Cumberland Heights Church of Christ. She was babysitting for Dawson Curtis, who also perished. Haiti Collins was ripped from her father's arms and was never found. The lists of people who died and their stories are heart-wrenching. Many of those who died were asleep or failed to get to their safe place in time. A cruel reality, as the twister struck around 2 o'clock in the morning. In total, 26 people died in the outbreak, and 309 were injured. The Nashville EF4 caused roughly $1.5 billion in damages, and is the 6th costliest tornado on record. The Cookeville twister was the strongest tornado in the nation in years. But with the destruction around them, first responders and community members got to work to deliver an initial response. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee declared a state of emergency on March 3rd, and a few days later, President Donald Trump signed off on a major disaster declaration for Davidson, Putnam, and Wilson counties, providing additional federal funding and supplies for those areas. Beginning at around 6 a.m., 4 hours after the Cookeville twister tore across residential neighborhoods, hundreds of volunteers began to dispatch and provide aid and relief through search and rescue, cleanup efforts, and medical response teams. Thousands of volunteers came out to help out their neighbors, cementing Tennessee as the volunteer state. A briefing held the Wednesday following noted that Putnam County had been overwhelmed with volunteers, roughly 2,500 in total, which backed up traffic for more than 2 miles, and donations were mounting at the Cookeville Community Center. In Mount Juliet, people carried lumber, launched Facebook pages linking to items thrown afar, gave their blood, and wiped away tears. So many turned out to help that officials asked residents to stay home so heavy machinery could access damaged neighborhoods. Several worked at a pop-up supply station in the parking lot of Pinnacle Financial Partners, equipped with work gloves, trash bags, water, wipes, and crackers. There was so much support that local officials had to request people sign up, rather than just show up to have an organized response to the twister. In a mobile temporary command unit at the Valley Center parking lot, volunteers outnumbered victims. As many as 5,000 volunteers were expected to gather at the local Walmart that Friday. The Lebanon Roughnecks, a chapter of a national motorcycle group, handed out soup and sandwiches, and prepared for an influx of volunteer labor later that week. A community in North Nashville helped neighbors lay tarps, clear debris, and pass out breakfast sandwiches. Multiple national charities got involved providing relief, such as the Mercy Chefs, Red Cross, and Operation Barbecue Relief, who provided around 120,000 meals over the course of 8 days. President Trump came to visit the devastation left behind, alongside a congressional delegation, including Senators Marsha Blackburn and Lamar Alexander, telling the press and the families that,
"Well, I do have a message, and I have a message for the families of those that lost their lives. And we love them. They're special people. It's an incredible place, incredible state, tremendous heart. Already you see people rebuilding. I mean, it took place."
He recalled how one boy was ripped from his home and was found a couple blocks away, relatively unharmed. His parents, however, passed during the twister. So, with that being said, they began to rebuild. But before I go any further, there's one little controversy I do need to talk about. 2 years after the outbreak, News Channel 5 conducted an investigation into the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. Ever since 2012, the foundation has been in charge of the collection and distribution of donations in Nashville after disasters. The funds don't directly go to the individuals, but rather, they go to nonprofits and churches, who figure out what to do with the funds based on what people need. Their website states that transparency is a critical component in disaster grant making. News Channel 5 went and spoke with Amy Fair, who was in charge of the disaster aid distribution for the organization. She was asked to see a breakdown on how the $12.5 million donated to the organization was spent, and she told them no. The foundation then directed the news team to their website, where there was a series of stories, which are just profile pieces on some of the organizations that received tornado relief money and the people who were helped. The website does have a list of tornado grant recipients and how much each got, but under the details heading, most of the early grants just said they were used to support relief efforts in the aftermath of the March 2020 tornadoes. The foundation stated that they were sharing enough information and said they aren't required to share the information on their website. FAIR told News Channel 5 to ask grant recipients for more information, which they did, only to not get a response or refuse to delve into what the money was spent on. FAIR stated, "We know how all of them used the money," except they didn't, as the news team discovered that at least 3 organizations didn't use all of the money they were given. But none of that is reflected in the Community Foundation's online reporting. Additional tornado funding was used for flooding in Nashville and Waverly, but there was no breakdown on how it was used and where it went. Even worse, one group had no idea that they received any money, and they didn't even ask for it. Many others who also got funds had a similar story to tell. As the team put it, "We discovered the Community Foundation did not track or account for all of the money it sent out." In August 2022, the founder and president of the foundation, Ellen Lehman, announced her retirement after being in charge of the organization for 30 years. In October, a new CEO and president for the organization was chosen, Hal Cato. He admitted to News Channel 5 that mistakes occurred. In the fall of 2022, the foundation went back and asked all of the grant recipients to tell them how the various charities and groups spent the money they got on tornado victims. Their website was updated to have full reports from each organization as to how the money was spent. Organizations that received money who didn't ask for it returned the funds. In early 2023, the Community Foundation met to decide what to do with the rest of the funds. They approved 8 requests totaling around $307,000. With the devastation around them, slowly the recovery process started to become more substantial, although that was delayed due to, COVID. It's been roughly 5 years since then, so how are the communities hit doing today? Over the course of 4.5 hours, a single supercell would cement itself in the record books, spawning 10 tornadoes across the volunteer state of Tennessee. Of them, a high-end EF3 twister with estimated winds of 165 miles per hour that roared over Nashville, Mount Juliet, and Lebanon, and less than half an hour after it lifted, the strongest tornado to strike the nation in years ripped neighborhoods apart, with estimated winds of 175 miles per hour just outside of Cookeville. One supercell caused traumatic memories for hundreds of thousands of people that they wish they could forget. But it's been nearly 5 years since then at the time of recording, so how are the areas hit the worst doing now? Well, it's important to note what has happened since then as well. The pandemic in 2020, a bombing on Christmas that same year, multiple close calls with tornadoes during the December 10th, 2021 outbreak, and the December 9th, 2023 outbreak, floods, you name it. 2 years after the twister, the John C. Toon Airport made major progress in rebuilding. There are now 78 new aircraft hangars. Now, it looks very similar to how it looked before. Other warehouse buildings that were nearby were rebuilt as well. Neighborhoods, such as Cumberland Gardens, have been rebuilt, with little to no blue tarps visible from the sky. The General Clinton B. Fisk Park was completely destroyed. Now, it has been completely rebuilt. That goes for most of Nashville, actually. Many areas have been able to rebuild and neighborhoods have come back stronger. Although not all locations have been as lucky. Some buildings have been taken down. 2 years after, Fox Weather reported that reconstruction was ongoing. Businesses were reopening, older buildings were being replaced with newer ones, and in general, the city known for country music was starting to get back in tune. As Will Newman said, "It gives me a great sense of pride of where we come. To be here on the ground to experience how far we've come in that period of time is pretty amazing." The Donaldson Christian Academy rebuilt as well, reopening in August 2020. Homes in Mount Juliet have come back, and the middle school was reconstructed and had its new building open for the 2024 school year. In Cookeville, neighborhoods stand once more. As of 2022, 70% of Putnam County homes were built back. A lot of them were rebuilt with new underground shelters and basements, with NOAA weather radios in hand. They're more weather aware now than ever before. Construction continues to spread across Putnam County, but some other things were put in place of buildings in some locations. A memorial park for kids to play was built where the Kimberlin home once stood. A memorial garden was built as well for the children who passed, and trees were planted for all 19 fatalities. 5 years later, to those across Nashville, Mount Juliet, Lebanon, and Cookeville, the towns are back to business as usual. However, the haunting memories haven't gone away. While the cities seem more or less the same, the people aren't. Not just ordinary citizens either. Mayor Porter stated that many EMS workers still have issues from what they saw that day. The horrific sights they saw, and we keep ongoing counseling for them whenever they need it. In fact, some stopped working in emergency services and moved on to other careers. Many of the scenes are stuck there in their minds, and it's hard to get past that. While the trauma remains, the outbreak left many of those who survived with a greater sense of weather awareness. Many have grown in a sense by coming back from such a low point. Even though the areas have mostly been rebuilt by now, the 2020 Nashville tornado outbreak is an event that the victims will never forget. From Nashville to Mount Juliet to Lebanon and Cookeville. And it's an event that I will not forget anytime soon. So, I know this came very soon after the 2014 Snowmageddon video. This script has been done for about a month. I was waiting on an interview, and that had to be cut short due to reasons out of our control. That's about it. Do not expect a video to come out this soon after either. And also, since I don't think I'm going to have another opportunity to bring it up in a video before I leave, it's very important to note that the ZenkaiCon schedule has been released. These are the current times as of the time of finishing this video up as to when my panels will be. They will both be at the Holiday Inn, like most of the panels there. Again, still recommend going if you can, if you're in the area around Lancaster. That's really all I have to say before I get onto proper video credits now. Also, I forgot to mention this just now, whenever I'm recording this. Video production is not really going to be a primary thing I'm doing over these next 2 weeks because I'm going to try and finish my panels before I actually have to go up there so I can get an idea as to what I can do time-wise. Yeah, that's it. Special thanks to my proofreaders, those being Gamma Ray, Foxtrot, and Ian Height, Celtic White for the character stills I use, Zinel, Cyanide Blue, and Crackalick for letting me use their music whenever I use it, Aster for the icons and his animation of the Nashville EF4, and everyone for watching. It means a lot. Special thanks to my YouTube members and those who are subscribed to the channel Patreon. Those being Montpelier, Will M, and Basilius of Stupidonia at the Elfies Army tier, Azalea, Heldrake Zero, Michelle, Tanner, Techno Idioto, and Warm Off the String at the Elf Junior tier, Otto Stratamus, Bipolar Batty, Brian Hawley, Dante DMC, Foscrew, Foxtrot, Grenadine's Death, Hannah Stormer, Husky, Jacob Collett, Kara Kelly, Kate, King Shisha, Leonard Brown, Liz Swaff, Beans Machines, Mama G, Rain, Rama, Southwest Florida Elevators, and Van Granny at the Elf Mini tier. Yes, I know I speed ran that. I am, like, half asleep right now, and I need to get this done. And also everybody listed on screen at the Elf Supporter tier. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to have access to stuff like full interviews, my scripts, and my own commentaries on my previous videos, subscribe to the channel Patreon or become a YouTube member. That being said, I think that's about it. If you liked the video, remember to like, comment your thoughts, share it all around, all that jazz. I'm Alferia, you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you all soon.